Assalamu alaikum, everybody, and welcome to day 2 of this Halal InvestFest. If someone could just give me a comment and just let me know that they can hear me and this is all kind of live, that would be fantastic. And then, inshallah, we'll dive in. Guys, Mohsin will be joining me very shortly, inshallah. And the order of the day is there's plenty to get through. And today we're going to be focusing in on property and all things related to property, because it's not just one monolithic area that you could invest. It's actually a complicated morass of different things that you can potentially invest in. So we'll get into all of that sort of thing. The first section, we'll talk a little bit about what property is, the pros and cons, high level, just thinking about the benefits. Then we'll talk about our own experiences. And so Mohsin has, his family have been involved in very recently in a large 10 house development project, which is, I think, fascinating. And in my background, I was an electrician and I've refurbished a bunch of different properties. So I'll talk about my experiences there as well as dealing with tenants as well. So there's plenty of interesting stories to come. And then the third section, inshallah, we'll actually talk about, okay, great, you've told us, this is what property is. You've told us a little bit about your own experiences. How can I actually get my hands dirty? How can I actually dive in and get investing into property? So we'll give a few examples of that, inshallah, and lay out for you, the different options that you've got ahead of you. And then, inshallah, we've got our very, very big announcement. Our second prize winner will be awarded today. Congratulations to Yusuf Barada from yesterday, who has walked away with £130 worth of investing books. I feel like some kind of talk show host whenever I announce things like that, but that's, I guess, a good thing. And then finally, we'll have a Q&A section as well. Great. So let's dive in. On the property side of things, why, firstly, do people actually care about property? And Muslims in particular, why do they care about property even more so than anyone else? The reason is, if any of you have ever talked to a financial advisor, the majority of your assets in your portfolio should either be in stocks or in bonds. That's the kind of classic makeup of your typical portfolio if you're not a Muslim. So if you are aggressive, you'll have maybe like 80-90% stocks and maybe 10-20% bonds. And if you're conservative or you're very nearing retirement, or you're at the point where you just need to keep your money safe, you might be 75, 80, 90% bonds and cash. But there's one big problem if you're a Muslim. And that problem is that there's not very many halal sukuk. This is the Islamic equivalent of a bond. There's not that many sukuk out there to be able to absorb that level of liquidity. And so as Muslims, we're constantly scrambling around trying to find fixed income, relatively safe options to invest in. And if you don't have sukuk to go for, and sukuk are typically a government might give out a loan, based on, so a government will issue a bond. Similarly, a government will issue a sukuk, and that will be a debt that the government owes to you, and that's very safe. The other ways that you can do that is you can get a corporate to issue a bond or a sukuk, or you can get some kind of sukuk based on property. And unfortunately, there aren't that many. And the upshot of all of this is that you find that Muslims, when they are looking for that fixed income element of their property, of their portfolio, they look for property. That's where they actually end up going for, because that's the only real easy, safe option that they can go for that is plentifully available. So that's why Muslims in particular really care about property. The things to kind of the benefits of property are numerous. The first is it is literally as safe as houses. When you're betting on a stock, or when you're betting on, and obviously I'm using the word betting, but I don't actually mean betting. Whenever you're putting your money into a particular asset class, you really are risking, whatever risks are associated with the asset class. And with a property, the chances of your investment going to zero are very, very low, especially if you don't use any debt in buying that property. So actually, it's relatively safe as an investment. So that's one big advantage of property. The other big advantage of property is that you can often insure away a lot of the risks. The third big advantage of property is that you can often get a really steady stream of income coming in, and the kind of yields that you're looking at with certain kinds of properties can actually be really, really high. And what would be an average yield in the UK? So a London property, you'd be probably looking at somewhere between 3 to 5% if you're lucky. And up north, you could get even up to 7, sometimes even 10%. And then with commercial properties and properties where there's multiple tenants in one property, you can actually head up to somewhere in the region of 15, sometimes even 20% yield, which is incredible if you think about it. And what I mean by yield is, let's say you put in £100,000 and that property yields every year annually about £20,000. That's a 20% yield on your initial investment, which is fantastic. And a great way to measure success when it comes to property is how long does it take for you to be able to pay off that investment over the course of the next few years. And with property, if you're looking at somewhere like a 10% payback, then that's great, because it means that property is paying 10%. And 10% paid over 10 years adds up to 100%, which is a fantastic, benchmark. Mohsin has joined. Let's add him in, if we can add him in.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone.
Welcome, Mohsin. You've walked into a property webinar, and we are just getting stuck into the downsides of property. Maybe I'll let you take the bad news.
Yeah, thanks for that. Downsides of property, yeah. So I think the downsides of property are unlike the stock market, and I think we actually touched on this yesterday. For those of you who were with us yesterday, you might remember us saying this, that whereas with the stock market, especially if you're invested in a fund, you kind of get exposure to lots of different things. Whereas if you're buying number 21 Ainsworth Lane, that is basically your world. And if anything happens to number 21 Ainsworth Lane, if there's a fire or God forbid anything like that, then that's it. That's your investment gone. And we'll talk about ways you can get around that, but that's definitely one of the downsides. I think the other major downside with property, and we'll probably come on to this when we start talking about our own experiences with property, is definitely if you're doing things like a buy to let, then tenants is probably one of the really big factors why people are often put off property investing. And I guess as a corollary of that, you've also got the upkeep of the property itself. So a tenant texts you or rings you at like 2 a.m. and says, the boiler's not working, you need to sort this out and you need to sort it out now. Not only have you got a moral and ethical duty to do that, but there are also legal obligations on you to get that sorted. So can you think of any others, Ibrahim?
I can tell you a story about a tenant. So one of our tenants, he was living in a ground floor flat that we had in Leicester, and every so often he just give me a bell for whatever reason, something broken. And for me, it was a complete nightmare because I was in London, so I had no idea how to deal with it. So one time he kept on insistently calling me and saying, "Look, the boiler's broken. Where it's very cold. We can't. It's very, very difficult." And I kind of really struggled and hustled my way to get hold of a plumber. And this was like Christmas holidays time, which was an absolute nightmare. And I managed to send around this gas engineer to the property because he lived a few streets down, and he turned up, and then he called me about 5 minutes later. And he just sounded so disgusted. He was like, "Yeah, I went in. All I did was I switched it on, then I switched it off again." and it started working. And I was just furious. I was like, this tenant has been calling me all day, and I've been like trying to do my best to get someone there, and that was all that was.
I blame you though. Don't
Why?
you know the first line of any technical resolution is, have you switched it off and on again?
I told him to do that, and he said he'd done it, but he hadn't. So
Did you tell him you're a qualified electrician as well?
I tell everyone I'm a qualified electrician. So yeah, there we are. I guess the other downside of a property is that it's very illiquid, and it's very, very hard to sell it. Well, it's not very hard, but it's relatively hard to sell it compared to a stock. So if I wanted to exit from a stock holding, I can literally log on during market hours and just sell my stock holding, and that's it. My money is there, and I can withdraw it within 2 or 3 days. With a stock, with a property, you can't do that. There's always a lag time, and there isn't always a readily available buyer at the end of the line. So that's something to really think about, because your money will be relatively illiquid. So if you put all of your money into property, that means that if there's a short-term cash flow issue, you're going to be struggling. So possibly don't do that. And that, by the way, that also applies to any of these online property platforms as well. And we can talk about that as well in due course.
I
But
guess just one last thing, I guess, to kind of bring all that into focus. All of these downsides that we're talking about. I guess when you think about investing, you're thinking about the risk and reward ratio. And we talk a lot about this in the course. We've got a whole section on risk, but the key thing with property to remember is, and with any investment, basically, is that what kind of risks and downsides am I taking on, and what is the potential reward for that? And I guess for me personally, I kind of struggle a bit with the people who kind of buy direct buy to lets for, I don't know, maybe a 5-6% yield. I struggle a bit with that, but we can talk about that later on.
definitely. So at this point, maybe we talk about our own experiences with property, and just share some of the learnings that we've had during the course of that. So I mean, I don't mind going first. So in terms of, I guess, my experiences with property, the abiding memory I have is of my mum buying a property of auction for the first time, and she was, again, we were buying in Leicester, and Mohsin, is there like an echo that you can hear? Okay.
No, I think I'm okay.
Okay, great. And if you guys can hear an echo, just let me know, and we can try and sort something out. So my mum bought this property off auction, and when she went to view the property, when you're buying a property off auction, it's great because you pay in cash, you get a discount on the market value. But the downside is that it's basically as you see it, and there's no real protection that you have, and there's no real time to be able to do proper surveys and all that sort of thing. You kind of have to be a bit of an expert in property to buy off auction in a safe way. And so my mom turned up in her first property that she bought off auction, and she goes and sees this house, and the guy who opened the door for her, this person, the auctioneer, technically they're not supposed to tell you anything. They don't particularly care. But my mom went around the entire house, and at the end of it, the auctioneer said, have you seen the seller? And my mum said, no, I haven't seen the seller. And the auctioneer said, well, are you sure? Are you happy not to kind of see the seller? And I said, yeah, like all the sellers are the same, aren't they? I'm not really doing much with the seller. And she bought the property. And she bought the property for 100. And the other mistake she made was, it was listed. The bidding was going to start listing. Let me see if I switch you to mute, Mohsin, if that helps. I think that probably has helped. I'll unmute you every so often. I'll let you off your leash every so often so that you can talk. So my mum bought the property of auction that was listed at 100,000. She said, you know what? I don't even want it to go to auction. I'll buy it for 105,000. And she just put in a bid, and it went off the market. And then she turned up to the property, and we won't even talk about how our first encounter with the property was because the neighbor next to the property found out that we had bought the property, and she called us up and she just started screaming and shouting and swearing at me over the line. And she said, basically, your tenant, my nephew went into it. My nephew went into his garden and got hurt, and you're going to have to sort this all out. So I was like, okay. And then the next thing we found when we turned up at this property was that the entire cellar was flooded, and that ended up, costing us a bit of money. But actually, in reality, you know what? That was a fantastic buy because, and it's obviously a little bit of luck as well. But I think many people did not buy that property because of the seller. But actually, we tried a few different things. We changed the heating system around, and we did some damp work in the cellar, and it worked. And that was that. And because of that, it suddenly rocketed the price up. So high level, I guess the learning that I would take away from that are, number one, make sure that what you're buying is, it seems about par value, and get a real sense of how much demand there is for that particular property when you're buying it. And you'll get a sense of that by talking to experts in the area, looking at the number of people who are turning up for, the viewings, and also just getting a better sense of the market. Because if it's a hot area, then there's going to be plenty of demand. So that's the first thing. Pay a good price for it, because whatever you pay, that's the starting point on which you're going to have to spend more and then try and make a profit. And then the second thing is that you should do your due diligence very, very carefully, because if you can avoid those kind of pitfalls, that's best. But then number three is, don't necessarily be put off by an absolute wreck, because the value creation that you get profit for is by solving problems and adding value to a particular property. And if you're getting a property that's mint condition, then you're not going to get much of a margin by upselling it, because there's no real value that you've added. But if you're solving a potentially big problem and you do it fairly cheaply, that's massive value add. So try and look for a few lemons out there, within reason, because that's where you can make a lot of profit.
Yeah, that actually raises a very interesting point, which I've kind of learned over the years, and also having spoken to a lot of people in the industry as well, which is this. When you look at listings for property, and to be honest, this could apply for like other things as well, basically anywhere where there's kind of a public market, sometimes you will see something that it looks almost like too good to be true, and you're kind of wondering, why has nobody bought this, and that kind of thing. And I think the property you're talking about, Ibrahim, might even fit in that category. And the thing is that sometimes you shouldn't be scared as well. Like, you should do your due diligence, and you should do things with your head screwed on properly. But what you have to remember is that majority of people out there, most people are very cautious, and most people will just rely on that kind of first layer of due diligence. So to put that into practical terms, you sometimes get houses that go on the market, and they're perfectly fine. They go off the market relatively quickly, but for whatever reason, the buyer couldn't get funding or something like that. That deal falls through, and then the property comes back on the market. And I've seen people who are kind of like, oh, that property's come back on the market, there must be something wrong with that property, etc., etc. And it's really easy to find faults in something. And then I've heard other people talk about the same property and say, what's going to happen now with this property is loads of people are like not going to be put off it, because they've seen it go on once, and then they've seen it come back on again, and they're going to think something's wrong with it. So I'm going to wait like a month, and then put in a cheeky offer, because by that time, it's kind of past its sell by date almost. Because when you go on like Rightmove or Zoopla or whatever, we all do the same thing. We look at what's newly listed, and they go the quickest. And if they have to find their way back to the market, there's often a chance that the people who were in the market looking are gonna they're past it now. So that's just an interesting tip that I've experienced over the years.
Definitely, great shout that. The other thing to mention here is that you can now get bridge financing via people like Offer. So if you in the description below, and also I'll just copy it in here as well. If you go into our website and you look for Islamic mortgages, then you'll see bridge financing as one of the options. And if you go for this particular bridge financing option, which is called Offer, then that's also Sharia compliant. And the reason why I'm banging on about Offer is because historically you couldn't get an Islamic mortgage and buy something off auction because it's just not feasible from a timeline perspective to be able to complete on an auction property in a month and get a mortgage sorted. Whereas with Offer, you can do that. Obviously, you should line it up beforehand, but then they can move quite quickly and get that money to you within a few weeks. So that's why it's pretty appealing to go for someone like that. So you can check that out. The other thing that I would mention is that when you're looking to refurbish a property, you should try and aim for like a 20% profit margin. And when you're looking for a particular property, really do your sums, like, really carefully do your sums, including the solicitor's fees and the listing fees and the selling it back onto the market fees, absolutely everything, and try and get that 20% return on it. Because if you're not getting a 20% return, then it's probably a property that may not necessarily be worth it. So that's the kind of number that you should be aiming for. And in terms of the really bread and butter stuff, for every property that you're doing up, try and get 2 or 3 quotes from different people in terms of what you're going to get done, because that process of getting a few quotes will get you a much better understanding of what actually needs to be done to the property, and it'll give you a real sense of the potential ideas as well that you could do with the property. Because many people think that it's just about buying a property and plastering it with a bit of whitewash paint, putting a new carpet, maybe get a new kitchen in, and bish bash bosh, Bob's your uncle, and you've made an absolute killing. But that's not the case, right? That is true. Doing that will add some value to the property, but the real value that you can add to a property is where you're strategic in your thinking. And it could just be knocking down a particular wall. It could be moving the kitchen from one place to another. It could be strategically adding a bathroom in. It could be doing an extension. They're just really small, minor things that you need to kind of think about and really be able to see visually. And the process of talking to people, and ideally you're someone who naturally is good at this, but the process of talking to people and doing a bit of research on the internet, maybe getting a magazine regularly and looking at inspiration, will give you that, because it's all about that value add. And the better you get at that value add, the more profits you will end up making. Anything else, Mohsin, to add from your end?
Definitely echo what you said about being imaginative and thinking in the house. Again, these are things that often people miss, and that's your edge and that's your opportunity. So definitely, I also started interestingly watching this thing on Netflix last night called Dream Home Makeovers. So check that out, because it might give you a sense of what we're talking about here, which is just being creative with space.
Definitely. You should do a lot of research around the space when you're diving in. Should we now move over, Mohsin, to the kind of places where people can actually invest in property?
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's do it.
So why don't I, before that, just talk about some of the brief experiences that I've had with property.
Yeah, sure.
So in terms of property, admittedly, it's not something that I've got expansive portfolio of property. I frankly, I've just never really got into property for whatever reason. That could change over the next decade or so. It's probably due to a lack of capital, frankly. But I think that definitely that will change over the next decade or so, inshallah. But where I have had some interesting experiences actually in the development space. So as Ibrahim actually mentioned yesterday, my father-in-law developed a really nice estate of 12 detached houses, and I, just through osmosis of that whole process, learned an awful lot about the kind of world of property development, both in terms of how it works, like financially and the economics of these things, but also just like practically boots on the ground. Because I saw him struggle day in day out for like 3 years, and I guess the really big thing I learned about development is that one, it can be very profitable if you can secure good land in a good strategic location, and you can get planning permission. And there's a whole like art, I guess, to the planning permission, field. And then the other thing I learned is that the construction industry generally is a really tough industry. And you've alluded to that, Ibrahim, and we all know how hard it is to get hold of like plumbers and electricians and all that kind of thing. And it's the same when you go like upper level, when you're talking about trying to get hold of people to build your house and do the various bits and the various components that are involved in building a house. They won't turn up when they tell you they will, and we're talking about like big contracts here. These are like 6-figure contracts that we're talking about, not like 100 quid fix my boiler type thing. And you have to basically be someone that is prepared to put up with that. So it's a really tough and difficult world, but the rewards can be very good financially, and the rewards can be fantastic when it comes to the quality of your house, because I know from the quality of these houses that you just don't get that when you get a commercial developer building the homes. And actually, one of the things I'm personally thinking about is buying land in order to build my own house for the future. So yeah, definitely development is something that's quite interesting.
Wicked. Right, let's dive into what can you actually invest in. So I think the first big category that you can invest in, we've been talking a lot about it, I guess, from our personal experiences, which is buy-to-let property. You can just directly own a buy-to-let property. You can now the other big tip here in the property game is if you can use leverage. And what leverage means is if you're using debt, then you can magnify your returns quite significantly. To give you a simple example, if you're buying a property for £100,000 and you can buy that by putting down just £30,000, then that means that you can get going much quicker. And let's say you actually have £100,000 sitting there, you can actually end up buying 3 properties for the price of 1. And that means that if you are getting onto a buy-to-let mortgage and you've set that payment period for like 10, 15 years, and you're successful at keeping up with that payment period, then within 10 to 15 years, you will have bought 3 properties instead of just 1 property. And that's just so effective. So, being able to use leverage is a really important part of a successful property portfolio strategy, and you can get Islamic mortgages on buy-to-lets. So again, there's a link in the description below to our Islamic mortgage calculator and comparison, so you can actually compare between the different options right now. And check them out, and then you can apply directly. So that's the first thing to say. The second thing to say is one shouldn't underestimate the value of owning your own house. We've actually done a should I buy or should I rent calculator, which I'll post into the comments now. And for many people who are thinking, maybe I should invest in property with yielders or something like that, and you're investing 40, 50, 60,000 pounds with yielders, but you're still renting your property, that is just a no-brainer. Like, what you should be investing in your own property first, before you are starting to think about property as an asset class that you invest in generally. And the reason is because you're going to be paying rent, and if you're paying rent of 1,500 a month or 2,000 a month in London, then that is going to be money that you just lose every month. Your £24,000 will be gone down the drain every year. Whereas if you've got a property on an Islamic mortgage, then over the course of 20, 30 years, you will actually own that property, and only a fraction of that will actually go to rents. So that's the first big thing to say. Buy to lets and residential, get yourself going on that, and certainly on the residential, you should get that sorted. The second big chunk is getting other people to do buy to let, and maybe Mohsin, you can talk around this, and I'll chuck up some of the yielders images as well, so you can kind of talk around that.
So what do you mean by getting other people to do buy to let?
Like yielders, and you can go for buy to let via other options.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, one of the things that's, I guess, a little bit difficult about buying a buy-to-let directly yourself is all the kind of rigmarole that goes around it. You've got to instruct a solicitor, you're buying a property, you've got to get a mortgage and all of this kind of thing. And in the last few years, alhamdulillah, we've seen some cool fintechs coming up, and probably the most prominent one, especially in the Islamic world, is yielders. They're regulated by the FCA, and they just make it really, really easy for you to get exposure to property without actually physically going out there and buying a property. And it's a simple it's the equivalent of a wahid but for property. And so if you are looking to get a bit of property in your portfolio, but you don't want the hassle, then yielders is definitely a really nice option for you.
Agreed with that. And I guess the other benefit with yielders is it's such a low ticket entry. So as you can see from this slide, you can invest from £100. If you are a larger investor, so you can get up to 25, 50,000 pounds. If you're an investor with above 50,000 pounds, you can get access to really interesting deals that yielders do with development projects. These are more high risk, hence the higher ticket entry point, and that's basically to protect people as well. But the kind of returns that you can get on these higher yield property developments are anywhere between 10 and sometimes even up to 20% per annum, and relatively short turnover times. And then if you want to invest with these guys long term, 50k plus, then there's a really interesting alternative way of getting involved as well, and that is by just giving yielders this money to essentially purchase these properties and then sell them down to the crowd, sell them down to all the other people that will buy into the property when it hits them, when it hits the actual online platform that they've got. And the interesting thing here is that they actually, they're thinking of it as a kind of savings account product. And obviously, compared to a lot of the other savings accounts, and the returns that these guys give is significantly more. Now, of course, please do caveat this by noting that this is a slightly higher risk kind of investment. It's not a pure straight up savings investment. So just keep that in mind. But I thought it was it's a fascinating alternative product. Mohsin, do you want to say something?
No, nothing to add to that. That does look really interesting, though.
Yeah, definitely. And then I guess the other thing to mention here is that it's not just yielders out there. There's also a new kid on the block called IntroCrowd. They do a lot more stuff up north, and they're much more interested in the development side of things. And I've always, I've liked all of the guys behind this. I guess the downside with Igloo is they're a bit younger. I don't think they have a strong, a deal flow. Yielders, they're a bigger team, so naturally they've got more people on the ground, and so they generally keep their online platform fairly well populated with deals. They were a bit quiet over COVID, but I suspect, and the conversations I've had with them, is they're looking pretty well stocked going forward. So that's a nice place to potentially put your money for a property investment. The one thing to mention here is that people like yielders, they do lock that property, that money in for a term of somewhere between 3 and 5 years. And so it's not necessarily easy to get your money out. There are ways to get your money out. They do have a secondary market option where you can sell shares in a particular property to other people. And historically, that's been fairly successful, but it's not as straightforward as, for example, selling some stocks and shares on AJ Bell, for example. Mohsin, do you want to talk a little bit about maybe Godwin next?
Yeah, sure. So in terms of, we're on the topic here of where can you actually invest? Where can you actually get exposure? And, we've talked about things like buying a property directly, buying a property through something like yielders. But remember that property isn't just, residential property on the street. It's also like a whole host of other things as well. And it comes in a few stages. So you've got, for example, commercial property as opposed to residential property. And that's interesting because, you could invest directly into commercial property. Like you could buy a warehouse and you could rent that out instead of buying a residential house and having a residential tenant. You'd have a warehouse with a commercial tenant. And actually, there's definitely something to be said for having a commercial tenant because you can sign them up to a longer lease, and you can put a lot more of the obligations onto the commercial tenant. So you could have a fully repaired and insured lease, meaning that you could say to your commercial tenant that you've got an obligation that every year you need to paint the warehouse, or you need to make sure that this is sorted. It's just a bit more landlord friendly, I think, in the commercial world. And then, so that's one option, doing it directly. Then you've got a few indirect options. And as Ibrahim mentioned, we have got on our comparison page a company called Godwin. And Godwin are a company who you've probably never heard of them. They only have a few people who they use, and we're one of them. And essentially what they do is they source property for the likes of McDonald's and Costa and people like that, and that's how they make their money. And essentially they take money in because that helps them to be able to acquire these sites which they can then lease out to these bigger companies. So definitely check that out on the comparison. That's a good way of getting passive exposure to commercial real estate, basically. And then one more thing to add is that, as I said, property comes at like various stages. So you can buy the finished product, a house or a commercial unit or whatever, but you can also invest in the ground. You can invest in land. And we know a company called IntroCrowd. They're also on the comparison page. They will buy. They've got a team behind them that buy. Their job is to buy interesting sites of land, get planning permission on them, and then flip that land onto a developer who will then develop on them, and they'll make a bit of money, and so the chain kind of goes on. So just remember with property that it's not just about the finished product. There's like a whole chain underneath it where you can get exposure as well, and there's some decent returns to be had there as well.
For sure. And just to add on the IntroCrowd stuff, and actually Godwin and IntroCrowd, like, the kind of stuff that we're talking about here, there's an entry point of about £5,000. And whenever you see a higher entry point, it should flag to you that this is a potentially higher risk, higher reward kind of strategy. So don't be putting, all your life savings into these things because yes, you are buying land at the end of the day, but at the same time, there is a lot of risk around, does the planning permission come through, et cetera, et cetera. There could be delays, et cetera, et cetera. So there is risk attached to these things as well. So just keep that in mind. But as part of a wider diversified portfolio, I think that, these are quite nice complements into that. The other thing to mention here is that, there's, as Mohsin, you were mentioning, different stages of a property's life cycle. At each stage, there's value added. And the value added at the planning permission stage is actually massive. that's the stage where you get a lot of profits. And so that's where IntroCrowd are playing. And actually, there's a few others that are coming into the market as well over the next few months. And we will, inshallah, be bringing them to the market and helping you guys find out about them as well. So make sure that you subscribe to our mailing list. Make sure actually you subscribe to the Angel Syndicate as well. And what I'll do is I'll share the link to the Angel Syndicate. Actually, if you go on the Halal Investing page, you can sign up there to the Angel Syndicate IFG.vc, and sometimes we'll share around some property deals that we see as well, even though we are not necessarily, the Angel Syndicate, we'll talk about that tomorrow. It's very much startup related, but the kind of people that we have on the Angel Syndicate are often interested in these kind of deals as well. So that's another way of getting exposure to that. And then I guess the final thing to say here is that you can get access to property through REITs as well. So these are real estate investment trusts. And these are a particular vehicle that are legally required to invest the majority of their money into property. Now, the problem that we have in the UK, and actually I guess in the world, is that some of these REITs are allowed to have a little bit of leverage, and it's often a little bit opaque as to how much leverage they have, because most people don't particularly care, and it's a relatively low amount of leverage. So it is something on our to-do list to just create a definitive 100 list of REITs in the UK and then in the USA as well, and just say, look, these are halal because they don't have access to any debt, or they don't use debt, or their debt is a very, very minimal level, and therefore you can go for them. But in the interim, if you guys want to research REITs, then go and knock yourself out and just make sure that they don't have any debt, or the debt is very, very, very minimal, because fundamentally a REIT is a great investment vehicle to get exposure to property, and there are some significant tax benefits as well that you can get the benefit of, because they don't necessarily have to pay capital gains tax within the vehicle itself, so you avoid some level of double taxation as well. Great. Mohsin, shall we dive into what to look for in a property before we turn to the award of the 10 pack book award, and then we'll deal with some Q&A as well.
Yeah, brilliant. So what to look for in a property? So we've talked a lot about actually investing in property, and we've shared a few war stories and things like that. But actually, if you are going to go out on the market, tomorrow, what are the key things that we think you should be looking for? So I think that for me, there's a few key things. Number one is quite an obvious one. Just think about location. Is it in an area where there's reasonable demand and all that kind of thing? And also, is it surrounded by something that's like an eyesore or potentially an eyesore, things like that. So location is a big one. Number two, I would look at potential. Is there potential to do something both within the property, but also potentially outside? Like, has it got a bit of extra space where you could extend, or it might even be a huge space where, if you're clever about it, you might even get an entirely different property on that space, because for whatever reason that land is just absolutely massive, and you can get it at a decent price, and you can increase your yield by adding another property in there. Number three, I'd be thinking about, if you are going to be doing extensions and other buildings and all that kind of thing, you just need to have a think about planning permission. So don't just buy it thinking, I'm going to do this and I'm going to add a third floor, or I'm going to do this, that, and the other. Have a think and have a chat to people in the industry about planning permission. Have a look through the records and see, have there been any like failed planning permission for this property, and just have a think around that, because you are going to have to go through that anyway. And I guess one tip to add in here before I let Ibrahim come in with anything additional that he's got from his experience is just thinking about that, the idea I was talking about before about buying land and building on land. A lot of people have kind of cottoned onto this idea, especially when it comes to building your own house. But one thing that's quite interesting is what you often see sometimes are really, really badly run down houses, which nobody wants to take on because it's too much spend, etc., etc. But actually, sometimes it can be cheaper to completely demolish those houses and just buy it actually for the land that it sits on, and then you can build your thing from the ground up. And sometimes doing that can actually be cheaper than buying just like ready-made land, which is just ready to build on. So that's something to think about if you are going to think more on the land route. Ibrahim, have you got anything else to add on what to look for?
Nothing really. No, I think you've pretty much nailed it. Now I think we're going to turn to what is probably my favorite bit of this session, which is my random award generator. And by random, I mean, literally, it's just me scrolling through my phone. Let me pull this up so that no one can accuse me of any kind of hanky-panky in the background. Right. Today we're going to go on Facebook. Yesterday was LinkedIn. Today I'm going to go on Facebook. And
so the context of this, for those of you who might not be aware, is that for the 3 days that we're running this Halal InvestFest, so the first day was yesterday, tomorrow's the final and third day, today's obviously the second day, we are giving £130 worth of books away, and the books are all around investing, and we think it's a really, really cool package. And the way that you enter, because I can see someone's asked a question, is you need to go on our Facebook, and there should be a post there that tells you how to enter.
And there you are. You can see all of the books there in all their glory. And now here we go. 40 comments. Oh my God. Right. Okay. So let me open up these 40 comments and switch it from the most relevant to all comments, because the most relevant is showing my dad. I think it's probably it's probably unfair to give it to my dad. And what I'll do is I'll start at the bottom, because Mohsin accused me yesterday of starting at the top and then scrolling down. So today I'm going to start at the bottom, and I'm going to I'm going to scroll upwards. Okay, and it's going to be a little. I'll do a little scroll, so you can it's not too much of a scroll. And then I'm going to go for this person. So what's this person? This person is Tahir Deen. Tahir Deen, mashallah, you've got a Sherwani in your picture, and congratulations. You've won the next pack of these books. So there we are, Tahir Deen.
Alhamdulillah.
I
wish these people were on the streams.
I think Tahir is quite a regular with various different investing things that we get up to. So he fully deserved, I think.
I was going to say the name does ring a bell, but I couldn't place it.
Yeah. Okay, great. So just before we get to the Q&A, guys, a final thing to mention, very important, which is that we are launching version 2 of our Halal Investing for Busy Professionals course. And this is a course where the idea is that you sit down and you can sort out your investment portfolio within an afternoon. And it is designed very much for busy professionals. So you don't have to do any kind of other work. You literally just sit down and all of the work is done for you: stocks, property, alternative investments, gold, sukuk, buying your own property, different investment strategies, how your portfolio is supposed to be structured, everything like that is handled in one place. And then you also give you a bunch of different options, a bunch of different resources that you can use to actually frame the entire portfolio. And then we give you a few different examples of you could be in a certain point in your life. For example, you might be near retirement, you might be just starting out, you might be somewhere in the middle. We've got a few different avatars where we do example portfolios as well, to kind of give you a sense of how to approach things. And then also we talk about how much you should be allocating to property, stocks, and other things. And this is actually a really important question, and there's a very complicated answer for each individual. And we go into how to kind of structure that vis-a-vis you as the individual. Because of course we're talking about stocks yesterday, we talked about property today, but I mean, do we know how much to actually allocate to these things? It's not really necessarily the kind of time and place to do this, and it's such an individualized kind of thing that you kind of need to really dig into that a little bit more. So that's kind of what we deal with in the course. The other thing to mention with the course is it's only available for the next month, because what we want to do with these courses is have them in batches. So then we have like a live Q&A session with all the students of that particular batch. So once this is closed, then inshallah it won't be open until next year. And for people, especially who are watching this, if you just use Halal InvestFest, then you get a 10% discount as well. And that's for the first 100 people. So if you use Halal InvestFest, and all of the information, by the way, is in the description below, and the link is in the description below as well. So if you use Halal InvestFest, you get a discount of 10%. So definitely check it out. We've had over 500 students already in our courses since we started doing courses last year, and alhamdulillah, very, very positive feedback, as you'll probably be able to see on the course page as well. So yeah, highly recommended. And yeah, Mohsin, anything to add?
No, other than that, if you buy it and you listen to it with your earphones, tones of Ibrahim Khan
Sorry.
directly into your ears.
Allahu Akbar. I think I think you were going to say something semi-mean about me, so I just muted you at the wrong point. So there we are. Great. So let's now dive into the questions. Let's start from the bottom this time. Mubashir, looking extremely suave, says, "Is this course online?" The answer is yes. The course is online and it's available now. Like, we've done it and it's available now. Fun story actually about this course was, out of hundreds of people who've done this, the first version of this course, we've upgraded it, by the way, and dealt with a whole bunch of new investment classes. So the first version of this course was done by a bunch of people, and one of the people who gave us, pretty much the only person who gave us a lot of critical feedback on that course, shows how much of a perfectionist he was. We took on all that feedback and we did this new course, and we hired him, and so he's now a part of IFG. So there you are. That's not to say, by the way, if someone's looking for a job with IFG, that's not to say you should like buy this course and absolutely destroy it, because
yeah, I was going to say the two things aren't related. It just so happened that we ended up hiring this person.
Okay, so Saleh Fahad is asking, is now a good time to invest in property, or is it better to wait until 2021 since there might be a crash which will lower prices? Really good point, really good question. My sense of the market, and having talked to a few experts in this market as well, is that is exactly right. From an investment perspective, I expect, and these guys expect, to see a lot more blood in the water, so to speak, in 2021. And you want to be looking at, I think the term is the 3Ds: debt, divorce, or death. In property, you generally tend to profit from these three things. So when people go into debt, they often will default on their loans, and as a result of that, the bank will foreclose on the property, and that will come onto the market for cheap. People die, their property goes to the inheritors, and the inheritors don't particularly care. They just want to get the cash out, so they'll sell it. And then divorce obviously often leads to a property being sold as well, and generally for relatively cheap. So all of these three things are on the rise due to COVID, and we would expect to see a lot of the cash reserves that people have would start to deplete and expire. And so by 2021, a lot of the people who are cash poor will end up starting to get into real trouble with the banks. And a lot of the government support as well has to end at some point. And there's a lot of support right now, but I would expect in 2021, we'll see a lot of that support starting to disappear. And there, if you are someone with cash and you're someone who is ready to move, you can get some absolute bargains. I mean, to be honest, you can get some absolute bargains now as well. However, it's very opportunistic, and I would expect the number of bargains that you can see to increase as we go into next year. Anything to add to that, Mohsin?
Agree with you. that's the sense that I'm getting from the market as well.
Okay, Tahir Deen is here. He says, MashaAllah. Well, Jazakallah khair, Tahir. It's a pleasure as always. Mubashir said, Assalamu alaikum. Okay, here we go. You want to take this one, Mohsin?
Yeah, so Muhammad, welcome back, Muhammad. So hopefully we'll be starting as a tax grad, a Big Four firm studying ACA and CTA. In the future, hope to specialize in PE and VC tax advisory. Is this an in-demand skill/area? I would say yes. You are talking to a man who, if I had continued, so both Ibrahim and I were corporate lawyers. If I had my heart set on a career in law, I would definitely have qualified into tax. And for it's the same in law firms as it is in the Big Four, except that the Big Four probably get arguably more. Well, they do get more interesting tax work. I would definitely say that's a good area to get into.
And obviously, Mohsin, as we've made abundantly clear yesterday, is Gujarati. So going into tax is very, very natural for him. And
You're
by the
a
way,
man after my
guys,
own heart, Muhammad.
what's that?
Muhammad is a man after my own heart.
Yeah, we'll have to do some digging on Garcia to see if it's a Guji name or not. And the other interesting observation, guys, is that when Pakistanis get into trouble with the law, it's generally due to drug dealing or some kind of petty crime. And then you compare that to Gujis. Whenever they get into trouble with the law, it's always white collar crime. It's like tax avoidance, fraud. Gujis are not rough people. They don't they don't deal in drugs. They don't get their hands dirty. It's very genteel stuff. So you won't see a Guji in the criminal courts. You'll see a Guji in the civil courts.
Well, they go to the criminal court for sentencing, but yeah.
Fair enough. From an Islamic perspective, is it not wrong to use debt to purchase multiple properties, even with Islamic mortgages?
Muhammad is Gujarati, excellent.
I knew it. I knew there was something suspicious about that Garcia. Even with Islamic mortgages, would you suggest this if you have not purchased a first home yet, if debt not high? Okay, so with Islamic mortgages, depends on the structure that is used by that particular Islamic bank. And I would highly recommend you guys, by the way, to go through our Islamic mortgage calculator, because what will happen is if you go through that, you enter in the details, that will go to our trusted broker, and then they will actually guide you, very correctly in the right direction. So, definitely take that up. But then the other thing to mention here is Islamic mortgages. The typical understanding is a conventional mortgage is a debt-based instrument, but an Islamic mortgage is a diminishing musharaka structure. And when you're in a musharaka agreement, you're paying rent and you're buying capital. So technically, there isn't actually a debt on you. So, I think the intuition behind this person saying this is that, aren't you just like kind of taking on too much debt, and isn't debt a bad thing? Well, technically, an Islamic mortgage isn't necessarily debt. Now, if you use a murabaha structure, which some banks often do, then that is technically debt. But at the same time, it's not technically debt because it's still a sale, but you owe someone something. So it is a debt in that sense. So I wouldn't worry too much about this. I think Islamic mortgages and Islamic banks will typically not give you very many mortgages because they're very cautious by their nature. So if you're someone who's leveraged up to the hilt, they're not going to give you an Islamic mortgage in any case. So I wouldn't worry about this too much. And would you suggest this in terms of if you haven't got your first house yet? It depends on your circumstances. Like if you're living at home, then you may not need a house yet. But typically, I would suggest get your own house sorted first before you move into other things. Imran Khan, who is an august radiologist based in Leicester. I know that because he's related to me. And he's asking about whether or not you can take rent from warehouses and supermarkets because they sell all sorts of other things. So your money is related to the rent portion, and the rent is not related at all to what that person is doing within the property. So technically, on just a simple reading of the Sharia, it's perfectly fine to take that rent. Having said that, I would feel very uncomfortable renting my plot of land to a gaming, like a casino, or to bingo or Mecca or something like that. I would feel very uncomfortable doing that, and or even a pub, for example. I think that's probably where I would draw the line, even if the argument could be made from a technical Islamic perspective that it's fine to do that. So that would be my approach to that. Mohsin, do you want to take this?
Yeah, so Suleiman's saying few financial advisors have done comparisons on investing in real estate versus stocks, and the return on stocks is much higher. Is there some truth to that, or are they manipulating the figures? I wouldn't say that they're manipulating the figures. Obviously, with any research, you have to look at who's doing the research and what interests have they got in doing it. But it's not surprising to me that stocks return more than property. I think that's a relatively well-known phenomenon that over time the stock market outperforms pretty much any asset class.
Yeah. How much interest in a halal mortgage? Well, none. But if you mean how much is the rate, the rental rate, which is the equivalent of interest, then best to check out our Islamic mortgage comparison, and the link is in the description to the video below. How would you compare the Islamic rental rate to the interest rates? Our difference is very large. Good question, Saad. So the differences are relatively large is I guess a relative term, but yeah, there are differences. You could get something like a 1 to 2% mortgage these days on the high street, possibly even cheaper because of the recent drops in the base rate. But with Islamic mortgages, you're looking at least 2.7, I think, from memory, and then 3% plus. And the reason for the difference is the way these banks are funded. So with conventional banks, what they can do is they can borrow off the interbank market, or they can borrow off the Bank of England at a very low rate, something like 0.25 or 0.5%. And then they can offer that at a higher rate to you, right? They're like grocers. They can offer that money to a higher rate to you at a slightly marked up price. The Al Rayyan Bank can't do that because they can't borrow money on interest from other banks, and they can't borrow money on interest from the Bank of England. So what they do to get that money is they set up a savings account, and they entice people to come to that savings account by giving them something like 2% returns on their savings. Now, the problem is if your money is costing you 2%, then you can't lend that out on an Islamic mortgage at 2% because you're just going to make a loss, because you have all these other costs as well. So that's why they charge a bit more. They charge something like 3%, and then the difference is their profit. And historically, Al Rayyan Bank is the largest and oldest bank. They've historically made losses pretty much the entire life, apart from recent years when they've started making a small profit. So it's not like, people often think, oh, these banks are trying to screw us over. I think that's probably, not necessarily a fair statement given the wider context in which they operate. Okay, so I think we've dealt with that, haven't we, Saleh? And I think we've said we can't really answer that. But any ideas, Mohsin, or should we just park that for later?
No, I don't know.
What is the likelihood one would be rejected from a mortgage application with Al Rayyan Gatehouse, particularly as a first-time buyer? And if we are, what is the alternative? You won't necessarily get rejected as long as as long as you've got a decent salary, you've been working 6 months, you've got a good credit history, and you've got a decent deposit. Then you've got all to play for. Where you run into problems is if you have a patchy credit history, if you've got a patchy you're not really sure about your employment. You're self-employed is often quite problematic, although it can be done. And where you don't necessarily have the employment, the salary or the deposit to be able to purchase the property you're talking about. That's very problematic. I've got my house via Gatehouse. I've previously been through the Al Rayyan process as well. both of them are fairly straightforward, and there isn't any reason, and it's quite hard to kind of judge what the likelihood is that you would be rejected for a mortgage. But as long as you kind of do the basics right, as long as you've got the essentials that you need right, then inshallah you should have a good chance. Let's continue taking some of these questions. I think we'll aim to wrap up by maybe like in the next 5 or 10 minutes, aim for about 1:15. So we'll carry on until then. Let's see. Mohsin, if you see any questions, by the way, then feel free to take them.
Yeah, all right.
How about this?
Yeah, go on.
Saleh's coming.
Partner and I would have to use all our savings to buy 25% up front, which will reduce our rent. Do you think it's a bad idea? It's really hard to say, Saleh, without actually knowing, the various figures and whatever is involved. One thing I definitely recommend you do, I think Ibrahim has put it in the description. If you go on our buy or rent calculator, that will basically allow you to see whether you're better off buying something and paying mortgage payments, or whether you'd be better off renting it and then investing, your savings instead.
Great. Navi asks about what the best area is. I think the first question we've already answered, which is just go to our comparison page. But the second question is, what rental area would you recommend as a buy-to-let? So London is obviously lower in terms of rent, but the capital appreciation is better in London. So there is that that benefit that you get, and actually long term, for large periods of time, London has been better because of the capital growth. Like if your money doubles over the course of 5 to 6 years, that's much, much better than the rental yield that you would get. Now, if you want pure rental yield, then looking at places like the Northwest, places like Preston, Blackburn, Liverpool, even Bolton, they're all great places. Manchester has historically been a bit of a hotbed as well. Although I think Manchester is now getting a bit more expensive, so the yields are coming down. I would say that even looking at places in the northeast can be very, very high yield as well. Now the kind of downside is, of course, if you're going to do it yourself, you have to kind of go up there and find somewhere yourself, and have some sort of access to the northeast or to the northwest. So that's kind of the downside there. Any others add there, Mohsin?
No, I was going to say the Northwest. Yields are good, but as Ibrahim said, it's all about a couple of things you got to bear in mind. One is your capital appreciation, which may be less up north, and number two, the ability for you to get tenants into your property. So that's something to bear in mind. Whereas if you go for a city, for example, Manchester or London or something like that, chances are there's going to be a lot more demand to get into your property, but the quid pro quo of that is you've got to accept a slightly lower yield.
For sure. The other thing, Mara, really good question. I know you're someone who's an active proponent of the IFG forum, and guys, you should definitely check this out. So this is forum.islamicfinanceguru.com, where as Sir Alex Ferguson used to say, it's a theatre of dreams, where you can go in there and you can ask a mufti a question, and if they give the right answer, then just don't look back and just get whatever investment that you're going to do that you're a bit suspicious about, get that into your portfolio. And then the other really big benefit is you can get into the investment forum as well and ask away any questions, and just pool the hive mind. You can pool the kind of brain of the collective Muslim community in the UK in one place and ask away any questions that you've got in one place. So yeah, definitely do get stuck in there. That will inshallah be very beneficial. Rami is asking about sukuk. So I guess Rami, on sukuk, what there is available, there isn't very much of it, sadly. And there was a Franklin Templeton Sukuk fund, which had a very, very high entry point of like a few $100,000. So for most people, that's just off the off the cards. And even the fees for that were very high. So Wahid have decided to change over from that to the Ar-Rayyan, savings, the Ar-Rayyan long-term sukuks that they offer in the back end. And that could be a potential option for a high net worth individual to talk to Ar-Rayyan on that side of things, because it offers a slightly better yield. But in terms of sukuk, we will, I think it's probably best to deal with it today because we won't be dealing with it much tomorrow. Sukuk are a fixed income return, and they typically are backed by something like property. And I guess the only sukuk-like instruments that we have out there now are the top yielder stuff that I mentioned earlier, the Godwin stuff, which is a fixed income return as well. It gives something like 8 or 11% from memory, annualized return. And then I guess you've got savings accounts as well, which give a much lower return. But that's kind of it on the sukuk front, which is, and the reason why I want to cover it today is because there's not very much to say, sadly, on the sukuk front. And that's kind of where we are at the moment. Anything to add to that, Mohsin?
No, I was going to ask you whether you thought something like Gordus, although it's not strictly sukuk, but it kind of, because it's backed by business and in many ways they're giving a fixed income type thing, whether you felt that fits in that bucket.
Yeah, I think so. And we'll definitely talk about Gordus tomorrow, inshallah. Will you guys be covering crypto? Yep, we will be covering crypto. Where can we get halal share companies list in India? I don't know is the answer to that. But maybe inshallah at some point we'll discuss it.
What you should do, Rahmatullah, is learn how to screen for yourself through our course, and then you've got the world is your oyster at that point.
That's true. That's true. And then oh my God, there's a bunch of questions. There are clearly different opinions of scholars on the permissibility of Islamic banking products in the UK. Isn't it best to avoid if there is a suspicion of riba? Really good question. I think that this is ultimately a question of conscience, and it depends on where you feel most comfortable and which scholars you feel most comfortable following. When there's a clear difference of opinion between scholars, the natural answer isn't to necessarily take the cautious approach, because there's just a genuine difference of opinion, and especially when one side of the scholars is saying, look, it's permissible given the context that we live in, and if we continue in this vein where everyone's renting the property, Muslims will be completely, they will be so far behind economically in 20, 30, 40 years time. When someone is making that argument, then to follow another set of scholars, there is an opportunity cost. It isn't the case that you are just simply saying, oh, these guys are kind of taking the more cautious approach, and therefore we'll follow them, because you're kind of negating the arguments of the other scholars, because they're actually relying on this core fact as part of their fiqh analysis as well. So ultimately, I think this is a question of conscience, and it's our sincere view, and it's always been our sincere view since we started back in 2015. And we started off as a blog, and some of our first articles were on Islamic mortgages. That Islamic mortgages, whilst not absolutely perfect, there are certainly things that can be tweaked in them. They are the best that we have right now, and our view, and along with the views of a whole bunch of scholars, is that they are perfectly permissible. But as I said, we genuinely, we respect the differences of opinion, and we are more than happy, by the way, to host scholars who disagree on this particular topic, because Islamic Finance Guru isn't about us just promoting one particular opinion. And whenever we are in the minority, we'll flag that, and whenever we're in the majority, then we flag that as well. And we'll happily host other people from all different kind of backgrounds as well. And you'll see that on our YouTube in the kind of interviews that we do as well. Oh wow! Okay, so there's tons of questions. Okay, maybe we end it here, and I know there's a whole bunch of questions here, and a lot of these questions are actually answered in the course that we do as well. And we will, inshallah, be doing a very specific, exclusive private Q&A with all the people who sign up to the course. So you'll get the benefit of that. And to reiterate, the link to the courses in the description below, Halal Investing for Busy Professionals. And actually what I'll do is I'll just share the link as well now, so that you guys have easy access in the chat to it as well. And the benefit of the course is it's longer than an hour. Within an hour, you can only cover so much. I mean, in property, we've done a lot, but we haven't actually, we're nowhere near complete on the property front by any stretch of the imagination. So, with a course that is, that you can kind of digest slowly over time, you get the benefit of being able to, really reflect and apply that, as opposed to the kind of, it's always going to be limited when it's a live event. But yeah, with that, let me conclude and get you guys very excited about the day 3 that we've got ahead of you. I mean, this is the thing that this is the investment class that I get really excited about. This is the Wild West of halal investing. This is where you get, I can't remember any famous cowboy names at this point, but this is where you get the really interesting high risk, high reward, high yield investments coming in. And we'll talk about this wonderful world of alternative assets. We'll talk about things like investing in startups, private companies, venture capital, private equity, SME financing, giving Islamic loans to companies, fixed income stuff, gold. We might even touch on a little bit of crypto as well. Anything else to add, Mohsin, that we'll be talking about?
I think you've covered it, but it's going to be very exciting because we love this stuff.
Absolutely. Brilliant. Well, Jazakallah khair, guys. Do spread the word for tomorrow as well. And we'll be here, same time, same place, 6 p.m. See you then, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.
Salam, everyone.